Okay, so we're going to start. So welcome everyone to the launch of our exciting new journal, Neurodiversity, and the webinar to discuss issues on neurodiversity. Just to note, as you just heard, we will be recording this webinar and it will be sent out to all registrants in the next 48 hours. If you've got any questions for the panel, please do post them in the Q&A function throughout the webinar. You don't need to wait until the end. We might not have time for all questions, but we'll do as much as we can to address as many as we can. So I'm going to start by saying my name is Kerry Barner. I'm a publisher at Sage in the Humanities and Social Sciences Journal editorial department. And the day of this recording is Thursday, the 21st of September 2023, and it's an auspicious day for me because my nephew turns 5 today, my next door neighbour's daughter turns 1, and our wonderful interdisciplinary open access journal, Neurodiversity, was born this very day. It's a journal that is dedicated to understanding and improving the lives of neurodivergent people. I'm a mother of a neurodivergent boy of 7, so I'm personally and professionally very invested in this journal and what we aim to achieve. I'm also proud to have co-authored a commentary with Kathy Martin, a neurodivergent artist, on how the journal came about. And this was published this morning along with the inaugural editorial and our first research paper, so we've got lots to celebrate today. Before I introduce you to our 3 excellent speakers, I just wanted to highlight why inclusivity is at the heart of the journal's ethos. So instead of following our standard procedure and asking Sage's design team to create a cover for this journal, we thought we'd do things a bit differently for neurodiversity. So we had an open competition inviting neurodivergent individuals to send in their designs, which would act as inspiration for the journal cover. And the results were really extraordinary. And Kathy's winning design is I think, beautiful and unique. But actually, all the submissions were very different and also very unique. So we wanted to mark that in some way too. So Kathy and I wrote this commentary about how the cover design came about, and it includes all the designs from the entrants who gave us permission to share their designs with us. And I wanted to shout out to Jen Crisp, Head of Design at Sage, for creating this lovely collage at the end of the commentary. So a big thank you to Kathy for her design and to all the creative individuals who submitted their designs to this competition. So now to my speakers. I'm very pleased to say that we have here today Professor Charlotte Valeur. Charlotte is an investment banker and seasoned FTSE chair, non-executive director and governance expert with a wealth of board experience across different sectors. She's a professor, author and public speaker in corporate governance, leadership, equality and diversity. A lifelong human rights advocate, Charlotte is driven to play her part in creating an inclusive society. She advocates for equality and inclusion for all, working at the intersection of government, industry, academia and the third sector. She founded Board Apprentice and the Global Institute of Neurodiversity, or ION, and that's an association with which the journal is affiliated. We also have Professor Joni Holmes. Joni is Professor at the University of East Anglia and Senior Affiliated Scientist at the MRC Cognition and Brain Science Unit, University of Cambridge, and co-editor of Neurodiversity with Punit. And Joni's research group uses the core principles of empirical psychological research to provide accounts of child development and understand childhood neurodevelopmental differences from a transdiagnostic perspective. And we have Dr. Punit Shah, Associate Professor at Bath University and co-editor of Neurodiversity with Joni, and his research group focuses on neurodiversity in adulthood, including a pioneering body of work testing the strengths putatively associated with neurodivergence, alongside research on the complex links between neurodevelopmental and mental health conditions. So welcome the 3 of you. In terms of the format of this webinar, we've got a few specific questions for our panel, and then we're going to open the floor to the audience to ask further questions. And so my first question is for Punit. How have you seen the field of neurodiversity change over the years?
Thanks for the introduction. Actually, before I say anything, just a big thank you to Kerry, who without months, years of effort and enthusiasm, we genuinely wouldn't be here today. And often people say these like vote of thanks willy-nilly, but I genuinely mean it. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for the question, which I've forgotten now. But no, so on the topic of where's the field come from, or where's it sort of going? So I think the biggest change we've seen, and this is reflected in the journal, is this sort of attitude towards embracing complexity. For decades, we've known really that neurodevelopmental conditions, differences can't sort of be categorized and boxed in simplistic ways. We've known this for a while, and it's taken a while for us to build up the impetus and the research base to make the leap and start making the leap towards understanding the complexity and the overlap between different conditions and thinking about neurodiversity as a sort of form of diversity across the population. So with the evolution of the concept of neurodiversity, with a commitment from publishers, academics, non-academics, commercial organizations to embrace that complexity, I think we're now starting to see that tipping point of where we really start embracing that complexity, trying to understand it and trying to make meaningful changes on the basis of that.
Thank you, that's great. Thank you, Punit. My next question is for Joni, and where do you think it's heading and where do you think it should head?
That's a great question. I think it was really nice to hear from Punit there about how people have become really interested in neurodiversity and really starting to embrace the concept and really to develop our understanding of neurodiversity and what it really means. I think in terms of where the field is heading, I would hope that with the greater interest from scholars from different disciplines, from neurodivergent communities, from stakeholders, that all working together collaboratively, we can continue to increase our understanding of what it means to be neurodivergent, but that together we can start to develop more evidence-based practices to try and improve the lives of neurodivergent individuals. And I would hope that through the journal, we are kind of one avenue through which people can come together, build this evidence base, and hopefully help people to try and translate that into their practice, whether that be in education, in healthcare settings, or in the workplace. So I think that if I could kind of wish for anything, it would be that the journal helps to promote this collaborative working to move the field forward towards evidence-based practice.
Thank you, that's great, Joni. And my next question is probably for both of you, Punit and Joni. What challenges do those in the field face, and how will the journal address these challenges?
Maybe I'll go first. I think that the challenges, at least from my perspective, or perhaps more from an academic's perspective, is how we reconcile different viewpoints, opinions, sometimes controversial viewpoints on what neurodiversity really means. You know, we can take terms that are out there in society and there'll be debate on what it means to different people. And I think neurodiversity, by virtue of it being such a powerful concept, a term that people are interested in, engaged in, means that it necessarily attracts attention from a range of different voices. And that's exactly what we want, particularly in academia, in research settings. So from my side, I think the challenge as editors, as researchers, will be trying to find good mechanisms to encourage respectful debate in terms of what happens at the academic level, in a way in which advances the field rather than sort of stifling or plateauing the field or sort of getting distracted, if you like, by sometimes smaller niche issues, and actually getting away from thinking about bickering too much, for want of a better term, in service of advancing the field more generally.
Thank you. And Joni, was there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think really kind of sort of following on again from Punit's comments there, I think, you know, I was mentioning earlier that I think it's really important, and it's really great to see it already happening, that we're seeing collaborations between scholars from different disciplines working with stakeholders and neurodivergent communities. But I still think it's quite a challenge to make that work effectively and productively for everybody, partly because although we might have the same overarching goals, we might have different motivations or ideas about how we might achieve this. So I think it's still a challenge to try and get us to all work together, especially when you're bringing across people in from different disciplines, when you're trying to really work closely with people who this really matters to. You know, this kind of field is really important to so many people. I think it's really important as scholars that we're working inclusively with representative groups of stakeholders, and that can sometimes be quite challenging. I also think we need to ensure that stakeholders know how to get involved and feel comfortable, not only being involved in research, but being researchers themselves, being a really active part of the scholarship. And I really hope that through the journal and through the inclusive approach that we're trying to take, we can try and help promote some of this kind of collaborative, joined up working. So as you mentioned already, Kerry, we're we've tried to be really inclusive with the journal. So we've had our cover competition that you've already alluded to. We have a strong representation of neurodivergent individuals and people who support neurodivergent individuals on our editorial board. And we're also, as a relatively new initiative and something that we're trying to do, which I think is quite unique to neurodiversity, is that we are sourcing reviews from non-academic neurodivergent people as experts by experience for our journal submissions. So I hope by taking some of these proactive steps, we are trying to kind of promote this collaborative working and try and help sort of encourage people to face some of the challenges that might come with that.
Thank you. I love that answer, Joni. Thank you so much for that. My next question is actually going to be for Charlotte. So what sort of impact do you hope that these publications have on those outside of the education and scholarly communities on real human lives?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here as well. It's so being autistic and ADHD myself, this is very close to my heart. We have a lot of new minorities within my family. So changing the narrative is really key, and that's what we're hoping this journal can be part of doing, knowing that we have a voice in it, that we have new minority researchers coming in, maybe delivering papers and everything that actually blends is a great improvement to what we have seen historically, where it's very much us being the object that's being researched, but not really having a voice. And gaining a voice where we also then feel we have a level of agency is absolutely key for us to start building our dignity and behave and be able to function as equal citizens to everyone else, which is really what we would like to see happening. We deeply believe in the neurodiversity paradigm, where we believe that we're not illnesses or conditions or something to be fixed or cured or eliminated. That we are not only a natural variation, we are important in the whole ecosystem of differences, just as every single, not just person, but species on the planet is important. If we lose the bees, we lose so many other things with it. And it's very important, I think, to see it in that bigger picture, and this journal could possibly help underpinning sort of awareness and understanding of the neurodiversity paradigm of us as we are, not of us as other people see us, and of us as our whole community, not a subgroup of a community. Again, historically, it was a subgroup of our community that would get diagnosed, which is a group of us that are most vulnerable and that have extra disabilities, mentally or physically, and therefore really, really struggle. And on top of that, being a new minority is making that a lot more difficult, but our whole community used to be measured against that, and we are, as well as a sort of newer majority, we are of course everything, and comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. And I think that's something that's not so well understood, and we're hoping that this can bring that to the table. I mean, we're not all white men in technology. In fact, white people happen to be only 20% of the world population. So there's 80% of people that seem to not be super included in the whole sort of neurodiversity space and research and represented in the same way as white people are. And that's something we definitely need to look at quite closely. So hopefully this will build a global neurodiversity community, as well as building, the amount of allies that we have, because they understand better what it actually means, and how we see things, that we have a voice in some of the research subjects. For example, what would significantly change our lives if we knew better about it, or if we could lean into good, strong research. For example, the typical myth about us having empathy or not, that's something we would like to actually have proper research done on, that's not biased into an answer that people have already decided they have, because it's needed. We need to kill those myths, and we're hoping that this one will do that. So we're super excited about being part of this as the Institute of Neurodiversity that I chair, and we're hoping to see that impact for all of us around the world.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that passionate speech. I would just echo that as well. I I've shifted my language around, thinking about just human variation as well. This is really about, you know, just the complexities about just human beings as well. So sort of boxing people into some different labels is not helpful. And the empathy point that you make, one of the most influential editorials that I've ever read was by Damien Milton about the double empathy problem, and I think that's a really key theory to think about when we're thinking about how people view the world and view autistic people in particular. So thank you for that. So my final question to you, Charlotte, is what advice would you give to researchers who want to improve human lives through their research?
So we've had sort of focus on human lives as in within the space, but I guess it all goes much broader. That obviously there's ethical considerations. Ethically, what is it we're trying to do? You know, does the work adhere to it? I know that us as the editorial board and the editors will already look at those aspects at it, but I think researchers will as well consider ethics quite deeply before they go into it. For example, we do find it super difficult when we keep seeing research based on the medical model of us being ill and a disease and what have you, because it's really all genetic research which keeps coming out. I mean, should I have been aborted before I was born? I don't think so. I would hope that other people don't think so too. Nobody deserves that, especially when we don't quite know what it's all about. But nevertheless, there's a lot of genetic research still being done to eliminate what we bring. So impactful research questions, for example, where the questions are actually drawing out the kind of things that really will have an impact on a positive impact on people's lives. And then also how to communicate. I think this is one thing that I often find within academia and research. It's very easy to get sort of deep into the academic language and how we communicate what research we've created and come up to. But actually, it might be good for a very small group of people who understands that language. But if we want to reach the global population, we need to understand layman language and how to put the research into a language that everybody can understand. Otherwise, we're not really changing the dial. We're just sitting in a small group of people exchanging, fancy words, and that really is not it. And I think it's also really important to stay informed on where's the neurodiversity movement going? What are the things that are coming forward? The more you get us speaking up and bringing our stories and voices to the table, the more it will change things. So what we believed 5 years ago, we're now seeing that might not be the case anymore. So it's moving quite rapidly, especially with more and more people coming forward saying, actually, me too, and I'm neurodiverse too, or neurodivergent, or a neurominority, whatever people prefer to use. And I think that's really, really key to be aware of and not lean into questions. I mean, we had a couple of years ago, a paper started bringing refrigerator mothers back to the table, which really should have been killed many, many years ago, but someone thought they should do more research on it, and you go, really? Could we just not? So I think that's super, super important. And feedback from neurominorities would always be good, and respectful feedback, obviously, but also taking it into account and understanding why it is the way it is. And finally, we'd love to see research that can help us on policy and advocacy that underpins some of the things that we're saying. For example, segregating us into separate schools, stuff like that is not the solution. Changing the educational system is the solution, and broadening the acceptance of differences generally. So those are the kind of things that I would love to see researchers think about. And then hopefully we can help measuring some of the impact of all the great research I'm sure we're going to see here.
Thank you. I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you there, Charlotte, as well. I think it's about informing research agendas as well, and having that participation as well is so important. So thank you very much for answering all those questions. We now are going to open up to the audience to ask theirs. Chris, I think you're going to give us some of the Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Kerry. So we've had a question come in from Nicola Heddy asking, if you are conducting research, do you think it's important to still include the medical model or social model, or both?
That's a great question. I'm going to give that one to Punit to start with.
Thanks, Kerry. Really good question, Nicola. And I think it's really important to include both, or consideration of both. And I think what we'd really like to see with the journal is actually a bit more of an integration between research that is coming at neurodiversity from different perspectives. So there'll be people that are stronger advocates of the social model that vehemently disagree with biomedical approaches, biomedical model, and vice versa. And there'll be people that fundamentally misunderstand the work as well. So that's where we come in as editors, and what we're hoping with the journal, and having an editorial board that has the relevant expertise to start bridging the important gaps between what one might talk about as the sort of old school, like medical approaches and biomedical work, and the sort of more contemporary approaches that social model to neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So I think the journal is open to, and has to be open to, research drawing on different approaches, different attitudes, different methodologies that arise from those. And our task really as editors and as a community is to start bridging the gaps and often misunderstandings between those approaches. But really good question, thank you.
Could I give a quick comment as well on this? So I think it's really important to include both of them, but what I think is really important is how we're including both of them. In terms of medical, for example, there are things that nobody seemed to have cared a lot about, or at least I haven't found it. For example, within medicine, do neurominority people react differently to medication? My experience with everybody I know who's autistic, who's quite a number, both within the family and outside the family, as hypersensitive to medication. And therefore, if we are given the same doses as the neuromajority, it will not be good for us. I mean, like, I've had 3 C6, and the only painkillers I needed was paracetamol and ibuprofen. And the doctors would not accept that and kept giving me morphine, which I reacted very badly to. So those kind of things, super important to bring into the table, absolutely. And I think there's lots of other things around, because of higher level of stress, do we get more ill, with different general things, and should we be more careful with stuff like that? Medical model in terms of should we be fixed or cured, I'm not a fan of, and I haven't met any neurominority yet who is.
No, so just quickly, if I come back, a really good point, a really good concrete example of why approaches from medicine and the medical model were important, actually, and about that, it's the context that's important, and it's the type of medically relevant research that's being done. So absolutely, a perfect example of where something like medication, which may vary as a function of neurodivergence, really understudied, really under research. And if we were to sort of throw out medicine or biomedical work altogether, we'd miss out potentially on exactly those opportunities. So yeah, excellent point, an excellent example of the need for that sort of work.
Great. So before we sort of go on to a couple of questions about the journal, Danielle's asked the panel's thoughts on the term twice exceptional.
Oh, I'm going to give that one to Charlotte to start with.
I'm very happy with the term twice exceptional. I know that it's used in different constructions in terms of being neurodivergent and being highly specialized or excellent in another area or in several other areas. It's used with different schools. I'm in contact with a school in the US where they use that. And the children that they work with are children other schools can't handle very well. But those children are excellent in so many ways, but they need to be taught through that special interest that they have, because that's how they best learn. But your normal school seem to not be able to accommodate that yet. So I know that it's something that's been used. People, it might feed a little bit into, higher or lower functioning. I'm not sure. I think I see it as a good term for children that are different in exceptional ways.
And Joni, would you like to add anything on that?
I think there's very good points there, Charlotte, actually. And one thing I was thinking of as you were speaking, actually, is this idea that, sort of the mainstream schooling doesn't really accommodate the differences that we have, as a population. that typically doesn't actually accommodate neurominorities, as you were saying. And I think that that's sort of an area of interest, growing interest of mine, and I think of many people in the field, is how we can actually take more inclusive approaches in education. I think it's about, rather than making an exception for a neurominority or for a neurodivergent child, it's about actually making changes around us so that everybody can take part in a lesson, can be in a classroom. So I think really that's what I was thinking of there when you were speaking about sort of how we might kind of make the world a more inclusive place and take into consideration the concept of neurodiversity when we're doing that.
Thank you, Joni. Next question, Chris.
So we've just had a question come in from Erin Hopkins, who asks, will the journal focus more on quantitative or qualitative research, or a mixture of both?
I'm going to give that one to Punit to start with.
A really good question, and a nice one to answer, where a bit like my other one is it's going to be the best of both worlds, really. We're looking for really high quality contributions that draw on qualitative methodologies while sort of valuing and look forward to quantitative approaches as well. And actually we've had a lot of submissions. Actually last month we had more submissions than we were even expecting, but keep them coming, and we've seen a really nice split between really great qual stuff and really great quant stuff. And I think one thing, if I could just finish on that, we're hoping for both and we'll take both. One thing that we see less of, I think we've seen less of for neurodiversity, but I've also seen less of in the field, are mixed method approaches. And something that's, I'm guilty of this as much as anyone else, but I often sort of have to remind myself and say, actually, it's great to see the best of both worlds, not just different people doing different bits of work and publishing on it separately, but we can embed the strengths from both approaches into the same paper. And actually that's a note for me to remind myself to do more of that. And perhaps a sort of note to anyone listening out there, it would be great to see really high quality mixed methods work as well, which I think would be a great, something that's much needed and would help to advance the field.
Thank you, Punit. Next question.
Sure, and we have just a couple more on the journal, and then we'll go on to some other topics. Will the journal solely accept self-report studies on perspectives of neurodivergent individuals, or will teaching studies also be accepted? And that's from Whitney.
I'm going to hand that one to Joni.
So I'm going to bounce that one on to Punit, actually, because I think, Punit, you were probably more involved in sort of thinking about the remit of the journal earlier on before I joined.
Sure, I'll take that. Yeah. So I was thinking, and you can read about this in the editorial, is we're launching with quite, for want of a better term, straightforward set of formats which match other journals like Autism and other leading journals at Sage, to sort of, for us academics, to give us something that we know how to work with, and that will just get us launched in a way in which we can start working out what sort of submissions we're going to get in. So if you look at our editorial and you look at our submission guidelines, check them out. I think Chris has put the URL in the chat. That will give you really detailed information of what article types we're considering, but we're very open to and thinking about and having discussions on a variety of article types, from sort of self-report, lived experience articles we're thinking about and discussing, right through on the other side of things to pre-registered reports that are sort of going to advance open science opportunities linked to autism and neurodiversity research. So at the moment, we've got a set list of article types. Have a look. And we're looking to expand on that in future, and have a, we're really interested in hearing new and interesting ideas about how we could use innovative article types. So if you have a particular idea, particular interest, or something that we could look to do, please get in touch with us, and we're happy to have ideas on broadening the range of article types that we currently offer.
And that's certainly my aim for the journal as well, is to be innovative in its approach to how it disseminates knowledge as well. So while we have got quite traditional article types at the moment, that is going to change, and we will welcome some innovations. So yes, as just to back what Punit says, we're very open to that.
Okay, Tracy Neville asks, and this sort of directed to Charlotte. Could you please expand upon your thoughts on what a revised new educational system would look like, as opposed to separation of neurodiverse people into separate schools?
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm leaning into partly also some of the things that Joni was saying around making the education more inclusive. We have started a group, Neurodiversity in Education, where we're trying to bring different schools to the table to discuss just that from around the world. I said I've been visiting a school in the US who is doing it, who's working with neuro-minority children very well through teaching them through their special interest. Every schoolroom, every classroom you have is neurodiverse, right? I mean, you will have all different neurotypes in every classroom in the world. So to think that you have classrooms that are only one neurotype is just foolish, right? It's not, that is just not the case. So neurodiversity is what we have between all of us. And those of us who are neuro-minorities, which is the kind of language that we prefer to use, neuro-minority majority, we can understand that because we're a human rights movement really that's pushing. To bring the minorities into the table is really to understand how we learn, as opposed to saying we all have to learn in one way that suits the new majority type, and you will all have to learn in that way. With today's technology, there is no good excuse for doing that. We can use AI and many different ways of teaching to teach people through where their special interests are. And through that way, and I've seen it live in several schools, the children will learn to read, write, do mathematics, make business models, whatever it is, as long as it's within a subject that has their interest. Then they use all the other tools as they work through the interest and spend time thinking about that. It is totally possible, but it does mean that we have to be much more flexible with how we teach the curriculum. And teachers will have to teach all neurotypes. They will have to teach the entire classroom, not just the neuromajority. And I think once we can start thinking about it in that way and not believing that we have classrooms that is only one neurotype, we can maybe start moving the dial a bit more. There is a group of autistic teachers, for example, more than 800 people, autistic teachers that come together. Maybe we should all schools have minimum 20% neuro-minority teachers to ensure that they can give that input of how we learn, and not just, that many of the neuro-minority teachers that we know are scared of even saying that they are, where in fact, we should draw on their life experience to get that teaching coming in. So those are the thoughts, because we have to make it easy. We can't. Governments don't have money to make big changes and spend money on it, right? So we have to find a way in where we collaborate, all of us, to get to a place of understanding, one, what's actually around us, and two, how to teach differently to different children.
Here. My experience of the education system has been very patchy for my own child, and I would like to see changes. I don't expect anything massive to happen in the near future, but to have children behind desks sitting still for long periods of time just doesn't suit not just neurodivergent children, but it doesn't suit an awful lot of children. And I think there should be more movement, more outdoor work as well. But that was one of my questions, in fact, which you answered very well. Thank you. Chris, next question.
Cool. So just a question here from Elizabeth Nilsson, who asks, one often talks about neurodiversity and neurodivergence as the same concept. To me, the former concept is inclusive, whereas the latter is dividing people into divergent and convergent people. This will only divide people, like in diagnostics. Are these concepts only associated to autism? Are we not all neurodiverse?
That's a great question, and I think probably all three of you will have an answer for that. I'm going to start with Charlotte, but then Joni and Punit, do chip in.
Thank you. Yes, we are indeed all neurodiverse. That is the principle of the neurodiversity paradigm. A lot of us do not like the word neurodivergent because we feel divergent has negative connotation coming with it, which is why we as Institute of Neurodiversity are choosing to use neurominorities and neuromajorities, because that's how we see us. And that's also a normalized language, and it doesn't add judgment to what you are. It's simply they're minority and there's majority. It could be that what we call the neuromajority is a minority majority. We don't know yet, but as everything folds out, it could be when you put all the neurominorities together that we in fact form a majority. But currently, and even so, we would still have a majority, which is within what they would term the normative measurements of how people function, but we prefer majority and minority.
Thank you. Joni, you're nodding vigorously there. Would you like to add anything?
Well, I would agree actually with Charlotte, and I think it's it's about language, but it is about sort of understanding and conceptual change that we need to come with the language changes. And I think, it was an advancement to start talking about neurodiversity, and then people did start talking about neurodivergent, neurotypical, and like you say, Charlotte, it becomes quite divisive. It applies judgment, and these concepts of neurominority, neuromajority, I think are much more acceptable. They reflect diversity in many spheres, and I think that really getting people to use this language much more freely and commonly is a really important thing to do. And hopefully the more we use this kind of language, the more the sort of understanding and conceptual sort of implications will follow from that.
It's also global, right? I mean, the whole playing with words. So English is not my first language, but I mean, in other European languages, we don't have the word neurodivergence, and it becomes really complicated. All languages have majority and minority. It's been around for hundreds of years. We get it, we understand it, everyone can use it. Let's not complicate what we're trying to aim for.
Thank you. Punit, did you want to add anything?
Just quickly, I think in response to the sort of general question of are these the same thing or are these different things, I think maybe the responses from Charlotte and Joni, without putting words in your mouth, sort of suggest actually they'll mean different things to different people, or at least they mean, to me, it means something slightly different to what it might mean to Charlotte. For me personally, neurodivergence is a word that I'm really comfortable with, and many other neurodivergent people will be super comfortable with. And there's with in response to the final bit of that question of whether this just all applies to autism, absolutely not. Hopefully, I don't want to not talk about autism today and not use the word autistic today, but one thing that I've sort of found with being an autism researcher is sometimes we talk about language to the extent that it can be a distraction. And when we think about what I'd like to see with thinking about words like neurodiversity, neurodiverse, neurodivergence, neurominority, is to hopefully take a view on this which is driven by research and driven by conceptual work, which includes academics and non-academics. So it's great having this discussion on the fly, but we don't have much research on the topics per se. And I think the journal will hopefully be a great avenue to build that conceptual, theoretical work and maybe some empirical work on different attitudes to these different terms, what they mean to people and what they might mean to people, as you say, Charlotte, internationally, depending on the language you use. So it's complicated is my complex answer to a very great question, but I'll stop rambling there. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess in some ways we haven't quite answered it because it's actually too complex to actually give a definite answer. But I think that is the point of language, is it constantly evolving. And I think that is something that we'll probably be tackling throughout the journal's history as language is constantly evolving anyway. Thank you, all of you, for those answers. Chris, is there another question?
Oh yeah, we got loads of questions in. This next question is from Nancy, who asks, many neurominorities have limited access to formal research training and opportunities to conduct research. Can you suggest ways to bridge this access and opportunity gap?
Now, does anyone want to go for grabs before I nominate somebody for that one? My inclination is to go with Punit for starters, but
yeah, I'll start. I probably won't provide a sort of completely wholesome answer, but where from our world, where PhDs and doctoral training is concerned, I think there are opportunities there. And one thing that we do perhaps badly, at least in the UK and maybe even the US from talking to colleagues, is just of people, minorities, whether it's neurominorities or minorities from society, more broadly in society, not being made aware of these opportunities enough. So, for example, PhDs in the UK can often be funded, not very well funded, but there are stipends associated with this. So in response to your question, Nancy, I think we need to do more as academics to shout out about the opportunities that are available to neurominorities and minorities more broadly. And equally, I hope that this webinar and other discussions on this, and I'm not a big fan of social media, but media and communication with the general public inspire people not just to engage with science in this sort of nebulous, wishy-washy way, but there are great opportunities to get involved. And that's, you know, for me, I've been through that process from being a minority in various capacities. And it's up to all of us to try and be proactive in finding those opportunities, and for people that are in a position of power to shout about those opportunities and raise awareness as much as possible.
Thank you. Joni, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Punit's talked about sort of the more formal training routes of, you know, doing PhD kind of training, you know, research training that way. But I do think as scholars and academics, we've been talking a lot about the importance of working with non-academic communities and stakeholders. And I think we have a responsibility to help to train people to be able to work with us and to understand where we're coming from as researchers, to actually kind of, I guess, share some of our knowledge and experience and help us to develop a common language so we can work together. So I think there are the more formal routes, but I also think when we are trying to, you know, work collaboratively and trying to advance the field, we have a responsibility, I think, as the, you know, trained researchers, to help to train others to understand why we're doing things, how we're doing things, and the purpose of doing things the way we are.
Thank you. I just want to add from a publisher's perspective as well, you know, I think we recognise that there are systemic inequalities across many institutions, whether they're academic or organisations. And I think there is definitely a much greater awareness and movement towards having greater diversity, equity and inclusion within organisations. And I know that SAGE, this is part of their mission, a very strong part of their mission now is to have greater representation across authors, reviewers, boards as well. But we are starting from a very unequal basis anyway, so this is not going to shift quickly, but I think there is a recognition that things do need to change. Charlotte, did you want to add anything to that question?
Well, I'm very happy with what I'm hearing. We want to eventually at the Institute build up in a way where we can offer a platform where we can publish some of the research from us that isn't seeing the light of the day for various reasons, and then keep pushing for inclusion of neuro minorities into research around us, and to get to a place where we would always be included one way or the other.
Thank you. Chris, do we have another question?
Sure. So Madge Jackson asks, we're starting to look at how to create a more neuro-inclusive teaching, learning and research environment for psychology students. Would there be any particular advice or critical things to consider here?
I'm going to give that one to Joni and Punit. Who wants to grab first?
I guess I could say something first. I think it's really interesting. I was at a webinar yesterday listening to sort of ideas around making inclusive policies and thinking about really, again, I guess it comes back to working with the students themselves in this environment and finding out what they need as well. So, you know, what is it that makes, for example, people feel excluded or in the minority, and using that as a basis upon which to start thinking about how you might implement change.
If I can just add to that, again, sort of quite a contemporary discussion and an ongoing one at with the start of the new academic year. One thing that I don't think is well understood at the moment, but something that I'm thinking about is, traditionally there's been a view drawing on how disability, so to speak, have been accommodated within higher education in terms of research, education, learning and teaching, that the sort of a straightforward model perhaps has been applied to how we think about neurodiversity, and in some ways that approach works, but in many ways it doesn't work. So I guess the sort of my critical learning I've experienced as being an academic in the field, whilst also being an expert on neurodiversity, is actually we need to think in slightly more nuanced ways about what neuro inclusion and inclusion means. Some learnings from ED&I strategies and ideas might you can copy and paste, but many you can't copy and paste into how we think about neurodiversity. And I think that just an appreciation for that is the critical thing and the starting point, which some institutions haven't quite got to grips with, and it'd be nice to see more of that with time.
Thank you. Another question, Chris, please. There's plenty out there.
Yeah, it's loads in here. Thank you for all your questions. Sorry we won't be able to get to them all. But D. Springer asks, do you utilize universal instruction in Great Britain and Europe? She says this is used in progressive educational school systems in the USA. She said she would caution, however, for advocating just inclusion for all students. For some, their environment may be too robust. Do you agree that needs should drive individualized education plans?
Well, that's a tricky one. Who was going to take that one? Is anyone going to volunteer?
I can maybe say something towards it, not answering every element of that question, but I think that when we talk about sort of neurominorities and sort of neuromajorities, and we talk about inclusive approaches and about making sort of, for example, school environments, places where everybody feels included, that is not at the expense of ignoring the fact that people do have additional needs that need to be supported. And I think if you take a human rights perspective, you know, everybody has a right to feel included, but also to feel supported and to be supported. So I don't think it's about, neurodiversity is not about like neglecting need. It's about addressing the right needs in the right way for individual people. So I think in that way, there still will always be tailoring to support people's needs. I'm not sure if that really addressed that question, but it was just a sort of thought that came into my head.
Oh, you want to add to that?
Sorry. Yeah, I can comment. So inclusion for all students is, I think, should be the starting point. And then there might be some students that have such challenges that is going to be very, very difficult for them. And of course, they will need to have whatever they need to have to be able to be fulfilled as human being and to be able to grow up and function as far as possible as equal citizens. That is what we are advocating for and what we want to see happening. But we do want to see the schools as they are today, especially like primary and secondary education, widen the band of how they accept children behaving. So, for example, if you have ADHD and struggle sitting still, some schools have a solution where they have, a little like a wristband, the little ones, what are they called, Fitbits, whatever, that measures your heartbeat. And as children start getting stressed from sitting still too long, they can show the teacher, my heartbeat, we've agreed a level where if it goes above that, the child can go out for 10 minutes, kick a ball around. Or, I mean, one child said, I would rather just go around and pick up garbage in the school for 10 minutes and then come back in. No need to keep them back into a classroom where they can't learn. So that's much better for them to do that and come back and learn something as opposed to losing the whole class. I think there are many, many little things we can do that are not expensive, that are not crazy, that can be easily understood and explained to the other students, that not everybody gets the same accommodation. But it's really about having a broad list of accommodations as tools to the teachers that they can use so that a broader group of children can be taught together. Because let's face it, once school is over, the world is blended, right? And we need to also be taught about that blended world, but more so the remaining world outside of us needs to understand who we are and what we are. They need to learn that from very young and learn inclusion and learn that differences are okay. I mean, when I was in school, I got bullied and beaten incessantly throughout my schooling for reasons I never understood until I received the diagnosis later. They could tell I was different. Even if I didn't look different, they could feel I was different. So I needed to be beaten and bullied. And it's kind of the victim's problem, not the bully. It's often the victim have to leave the school before the bully does. Those are the kind of things we've got to address, but we can only address them if we are in there with everyone else. We can't be segregated into another. So I was segregated into another class with a peer that was dyslexic. So him and me were sitting in this other classroom with a teacher, by which time the rest of the class decided we were both, dumb was the word that was used about us for the remaining 9 years of that school. So that's what we get from segregation. We do not get what we want to achieve for the rest of our life, which is equality, dignity, and respect from other people that they have learned from when they're very young.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for sharing that as well. Chris, do we have another question?
Oh yeah, we've got a question from Ian, who's a paediatrician. He's asking about submitting research on improving diagnostic services, which would be mixed methods. Punit, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, really good question, and I see similar questions from the attendee. So no, absolutely, we really encourage submissions, mixed method submissions on diagnosis and diagnostic approaches and problems with diagnostic approaches in the UK and elsewhere. And in particular, I think we'd welcome and genuinely encourage submissions from clinicians. We have clinicians well represented on our editorial board. We're really focused on sort of, as I've said before, and I don't want to sort of say, sound like a broken record, but bridging gaps between what we've always done with where we're trying to go. And that's where that gap, and tackling that gap is only going to happen if we do have submissions that do focus on and are interested in diagnostic approaches. And that's certainly something that we'd encourage people to submit.
We would certainly, from our point of view, really like to see more and more discussions around the diagnostics and how they're done, better ways of doing it. So absolutely welcoming. This is one of the things where I think we have to, work together closely, also with the medical world, to ensure that we get that right. Even if our North Star might be a world where we don't need diagnostics, we might never reach that point. But we know what we're working towards. But that demands a world that is very broad in the acceptance of differences, and human beings just seem to be too tribal, and the cognitive maturity we're operating on in the world right now is very far away from that and might never reach that point. So we absolutely need those. So Ian, please do bring some of that to the table, for absolutely sure.
Thank you. I think we've probably got time for a couple more questions, and then we'll probably need to wrap up. So, Chris, do you want to take?
Sure. Yeah. So we got a question here from Krista Walker, saying more and more women are being diagnosed with autism late into adulthood, and there is still so little information across the internet for non-academics to help make sense of a new diagnosis that may have come as a surprise. She's saying, it's a bit of a general question, but she's just curious about the panel's thoughts on sort of where research is at and where it's heading in terms of autism presenting in adult women.
Thank you. I'm going to hand that one to Punit to tackle. Thank you.
Yeah, really good question, and an area of contemporary interest, sort of looking at the associations between sex, gender, and autism and neurodiversity more generally. So I think in general there isn't enough research on this, and actually I think what there has been focused, again, this is my perspective, actually focused and perhaps overly focused on trying to find differences. And I get that, and often there's a sort of trend towards, well, if we can find differences between autistic men and women, then that might somehow be useful. And sometimes that's really important, and sometimes that is. But one thing that I think is lacking in the field is the research overall, but also research in large enough sample sizes where we have, for example, have the statistical power to actually work out whether there are differences between, for example, autistic males and females, and the extent of those differences. So I think where we need to be going is having those larger, more representative samples in order to work that out. So yes, there's a need for more of it, but also I think a need for more nuance and the design of research in a way in which is open to finding differences, yes, where they exist and where they're important and where they're required, where we need to find them and address them, where they have implications for other health inequalities, for example, but also an openness to finding similarities between, for example, autistic men and women, or men and women with and without ADHD. That research is also important and something that we need to see more of in the field, at least in my view.
Thank you. And actually, I wanted to make one point about the journal as well. The journal is called Neurodiversity, and while there are an awful lot of autism research journals out there, this is unique in that we will be publishing autism research. We know that's well funded, but we really, really welcome research on other neurodevelopmental differences like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD and others which are probably less well funded. So that's my call out to people listening here, that this is not another autism research only journal. This is across all neurodevelopmental differences. I think on that note, we're going to have one last question, then I'm going to wrap up. So Chris.
Sure, that actually just covers one of the questions that I was going to ask. So that's quite good. Just on areas of more focus for the research community. Let's look and see if we got one more here. Whitney's asking, does the journal prefer identity first language or person first language, or alternating?
That's always going to be a tricky question to answer. I'm going to give that one to, I'm going to start with Charlotte and then Joni to end.
I don't think we've set a policy on that. The thing is, people see it differently and everyone has their own preference. I know that the majority of, for example, the autistic people I know call themselves autistic people, not people with autism. Generally, when people say people with autism, it's generally not from us. It's generally from other non-autistic people. But some of us would call ourselves person with autism. It's just not the majority. So I think that's just so. But with most other neurodiversities and neurotypes, it would generally be, so I have ADHD. People would probably say people with Tourette's, people with dyslexia. So I think it's mainly actually in the autistic area that there is sort of that issue, and it is an issue because autistic people get upset with hearing with autism just because they feel there's not something we can take on and off.
Thank you. Joni, you've got 30 seconds to wrap up on that point before I wrap up.
I think I would just echo that from our perspective as editors, we don't have a policy on it at all. As you said, Charlotte, it differs. So autistic people would use sort of person first language. For other neurodevelopmental differences, people don't. So we don't have a policy as editors or for the journal.
Thank you. I want to say a huge thank you to our three panelists, Charlotte, Joni and Punit, for taking time out today to share their experience. I would say a huge thank you to the people in the audience who posed some fantastic questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I think we've raised a lot of questions. I'm not sure we've always found solutions, but hopefully that the start of this journal will be starting to turn that tide. And I just want to say a final thank you to Chris and Camille, who've been working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen today. So thank you, everybody, and you will be sent a recording of this webinar. Goodbye.